Hello, how are you doing? I am back this week with something else. And, well, what I do want to talk about is something that I saw online. I haven't really been on Twitter space. I have two Twitter accounts. And one of them primarily is football, which I have been on that one recently. But then the other one is usually more societal conversations. And the problem, the reason why I try to stay much more on the football side is because um, I can ignore most of the noise because, you know, the line between banter and um, actual objective criticism or what is uh, pro- um, presented as actual objective criticism is very thin. So you really can't see the difference. They're all practically nonsense. And I think I can eliminate those ideas as nonsense because, it's football and I could just ignore it. But on the other Twitter account, it's more political, social, cultural. And so I'm less, immune to the nonsense from that space. And I'm more likely to get engaged, even though I know this is what the algorithm wants. And I still understand that it isn't a reflection of, the actual people in society or what happened. So I did log back into this account, the more social, less football account. And there is a video that is being up and about. So Maraji, she's a she's a content creator who does skits. She usually does skits. I mean, that's what she was known for, doing skits. And she's Nigerian. And she's reacting to a video a man did. Now, the man is talking about the experiences he had as a consequence of his wife's pregnancy. Is narrating how he felt alone during the entire process. And she's really upset. She laughs at everything he says and she downplays it. And the comments on that original video, which she is reviewing, claims or points. No, the comments are under the original video. Under the video, Maraji reacts to the video. People, especially women, pointing that he's a narcissist, he's self-centered, he's selfish, yada yada yada. And the Twitter is basically a much articulated reflection of those comments, the people in those comments. Then again, I do understand them. Number of times, Twitter, also any social media, isn't an actual reflection of the people in society and their views and what people actually think. You could go outside the world and you could find out that most people are usually sometimes closer to the gray than to the black or the white. And maybe that is the case in this instance. I'm not sure. But I wanted to look at this, at least from the social media point of view. Let's just start with this. Let's just start as though it's a problem. Well, not a problem, but something to think about. I want to tag this video as "Do men deserve sympathy?" And I think ideally, we would think the society we live in, the answer should be yes. But I think it's more complex than that. And I don't want to, as always, I don't want to look at it on any form of surface level. I really want to delve down into the underlying, you know, mm, problems and the patterns at play, and try and put it together and try and make something that, what is true out of it. So we could just start off, we could just look at the question, do men deserve sympathy? Well, I mean, first of all, I think there are a couple of things in that sentence we need to look at. Well, I think the first thing is men. And I want to be careful about what I'm saying, because I think sometimes when people say things, when people have topics like this, I think a lot of things are like vague. And, because of the vagueness of the conversation, I think you could say anything and justify anything. You could get into a lot of arguments, and it is really problematic, because if I say two men deserve sympathy, someone will say, well, men are rapists. And it's like, well, I'm not talking about the type of men. So I think it's kind of imperative to lash out the differences or the nuances that I'm trying to question. So by men, I'm not just saying any random man, even though I do think. I mean, personally, my view is everyone deserves sympathy and empathy. No, empathy. I really believe everyone deserves empathy. I think sympathy is not a choice. I think you can get to empathy. I don't think you can get to sympathy, but I think you can rationally get to empathy. But at least cognitive empathy, I think. So, but in this instance, I'm not really trying to focus about everyone. Okay, I'm talking specifically about a certain group of men. And I think this group of men I'm trying to talk about are really a special class of men. I'm not sure. No, I don't want to attribute any form of, special characteristics when I say special. I don't want to do something like that, because I don't really have any form of stable proof to justify what I'm saying. But the class of men I'm talking about are men that are more understanding of their feelings and more perceptive of how they feel in certain situations. And they're also more likely to want to be expressive, to want to be to want not to just hold it in, to want to let it out, to want to have comfort. So even if it's within a friend group, they enjoy emotional connections and things like that. And I'm not saying that this set of men are in these areas active, whereas the men not in this area are not active. I think it's more like a spectrum. I think these men I'm talking about are more like average to the end, and I would say this is quite different from the quite normal standard of what a man should represent and be. A man is obligated not to be strong. It's not to be strong, but it's obligated to be strong and not to be weak. And well, to be strong means also to not cry, to not express, to not be weak. And there's certain things that are weak by societal standards, and part of it is someone expressing their emotions in a way that kind of makes you dependent rather than independent. And I think certain men, I think in my experience, especially with previous generations, and I could be wrong, I'm not, because I don't have studies, I've not looked into it, but in my experience, it's really like my parents' generation, men were more like this. They're more independent, less weak. And I'm not saying weak in any form of condescending, man. I'm just saying weak in alignment to how society uses the word, or certain groups in society use the word. So it was kind of cultural societal suicide to be weak. And most of them, easily adapted to this. conception and a reality of what a man should be and how a man should act and what a man should say. And it is quite, no, yeah. So there is that group, of people in society. What makes it different? Not what makes it different. What am I saying? I think with this new generation, with our generation, I think we have situations where there is more space. There's bigger space for people, men, to, if they can, express themselves in ways they couldn't before. Now, this is not to say that there is an overwhelming amount of men moving into this direction, but I think more men who are naturally aligned in this particular direction are coming out. Now, so when I'm saying men, that is particularly what I'm talking about. So when I say do men deserve sympathy, that is what I'm talking, or empathy, that is what I'm talking about. So do men deserve empathy? Now, the next thing we're going to look at is deserve. Now, deserve is normative in the sense that it claims something should be a particular way. So if I say you deserve something, I'm saying you should get the thing of which you deserve for some reason. Now, things like this, I'm not fully aware of like the the full spectrum of categorization of these beliefs in terms of normative and descriptive. I'll just say that let's say, to simplify, for something to be normative, it could either be subjectively normative or objectively normative. Obviously, I'm sure there are more philosophical dimensions to this. That's why I'm, not trying to pose that I know anything, to be honest. But we could just say there is a subjective normative and there's not objective normative. And so what is the objective normative? So the objective normative would be that to suggest something should be a particular way, you are saying there is an objective standing that says this is the right way to be, regardless of human emotions or human expressions of the thing, and that is how it should just be. Now, that is very... Now, you really cannot justify it except in, some form of claim that suggests some sort of human overriding principle that supersedes and dictates the nature of the world. Like religion does. Religion claims to supersede and dictate how things should be. If God does exist, then should be. But I don't know. You could then, talk about the legitimacy of the existence of God, of religion, of the truth of religion. I do not believe it exists, and maybe that should be a conversation I have, because I think, it'd be good if we could just easily separate the idea that believes God does exist, because to completely negate it without justifying the negation of God or religion I don't think it's fair. Well, I do not believe it exists, but and also I think it's problematic to suggest it exists, because to impute it in arguments would be problematic, because people say, well, you have to believe God exists. Well, then what God? And I think the problem with what God isn't discussed enough. I think the problem of what God is not really discussed enough, because I was having an argument one time with a Christian about there was, I can't remember, do you know what the name of this argument is, which means that the world is a series of cause and effect. And, if the world is a series of cause and effect, there must be something, there must be a being or something that must exist outside of the series of cause and effects that did originate the first cause. And I said, and I agreed that was a good argument, but why would that be God? Was my own question to him, which, he couldn't really give me an answer. Like, why would it be God? Because I think that's the problem. Like, why God? Which God? And I think there is a level of complexity involved in that we ignore. That I think we just try and always look at it. Is it that God yes or God no? But I think it's not either God yes or God no. I think if you can even get to God yes, it's like, what God then? And what God then is I think is a much difficult place, because the the biggest benefit God has in a debate is this non-direct reference. You can't necessarily reference God to anything. God is like in a space where it's non-existent, it's non-relation, it's justified, and is non-proof is also justified, in the sense that there is no direct way to reference whether or not it is true. And that is a big reference. And that is a big claim for him. Not claim, is a big advantage for him in the realm of like normal argumentation. But then again, you then have, like, if you get to the word God, then you have a series of gods who all reside in this space, and it's like, how do you win? And they try and win through, like, testing the accuracy of their books, or testing the accuracy of their books against history, testing their predictions and things like that. And other things that you look at, I don't know. But I'm not going to assert that I do not believe that there is anything that suggests, an overarching principle that dictates how things should be. Roughly, I just think that exists. I don't think that exists. I really don't. And I think I should justify why, maybe in the next video, but I should justify why I don't think that exists. But for now, I'm just going to say I don't think God exists. And therefore, I don't think there is an overarching principle. And I think if there was, we wouldn't know if there is. Like, okay, let's do it like this, okay? We just want to claim on the basis of what we know. And you cannot say you know that God exists. It's a problem of argument, because well, then the question is, what is knowledge? What is it to know that something is true? And people say, well, to know is to have evidence, but in truth, to actually know that something is true is to feel that it's true. Because evidence are just reasons to feel something. So if you feel something without evidence, it doesn't mean you don't know it, because you have the same knowledge. You just don't have the same knowledge without any form of points. Okay. So that wouldn't work. We're just going to say we're not going to accept that there is an overarching principle about things should or should be. But even though I don't think I'm aware of any direct reference in religion that dictates whether or not men, or the class of men that I'm mentioning, deserve sympathy. But we're wasting so much time on this. Okay. And then sympathy or empathy, what do I mean by that? Basically what I'm saying is, should they be understood from where they are coming from? Which is what I think empathy is, and I think which is what I believe what everybody should have. In terms of in terms of their societal relations and all that. But yeah, we've analyzed the you know, we've spread out the what we mean and what we're trying to talk about, and I guess it's time to talk about it. Do men deserve sympathy? Um, well, the case what we're going to reference in trying to understand and talk about this is what's currently happening in the Twitter space with Maraji, and we want to understand if men deserve sympathy. So, what's happening? I think, like I said again, I don't believe in any way that uh, the people talking or the views of the people talking, I don't believe it's necessarily a true reflection of the views outside of those spaces. It could be, it usually could be, But so what's happening is women are okay. So the women, I think, I think, I think, I think they feel that the men in question shouldn't have the experiences um justified or understood or the emotions validated in any way because the woman goes through much more. So I'm trying to understand their own perspective, and I think that's what they're trying to say. Pregnancy is a lot more taxing and emotionally, what's the word? Expensive for the woman compared to the man. So why should the man have any complaints? Why should he want to be, why should he want to be validated? Why should he want to be part of the center? Why should he want to be asked what's going on? How is he doing? And there's like big disdain from those ladies on there on whether or not men should get sympathy or it's not, there's this thing towards the idea that men should get sympathy because they experience the childbirth of a woman. And and I know I have established that I don't believe anyone, like, I don't believe there's anything about should or shouldn't. I don't believe morality exists or anything like that. So, if you did ask me, what do I believe? I don't believe for or against anything. I'm quite agnostic. I'm very agnostic. I'm allergic to everything, and I'm a firm believer of nothing. I believe nothing. I believe zero exists. As the norm, I believe nothing exists. And I did write about this in my Substack, where I said nothing does exist. Did I write about this? No, I haven't. No, I have written about this, but I haven't published it. I'm not going to talk about that now. So now I think I'm confused because originally I was trying to point out why we should give men sympathy regardless of, the fact that men do, despite how we feel. But then again, I know that I don't believe objectively, that anything is for or against anything. I believe things are zero. So I think I'm struggling on how to phrase this in a way that would bring everybody back to sympathy or empathy. Maybe I'm not going to talk about shoot or shipments, but I'm not going to talk about like how things relate to one another. For example, very recent times, I think women's major concern is that they weren't listened to. They weren't listened to in terms of what they were going through and what they had to do, and the experiences they had were usually invalidated. I think they found that to be problematic. I think one big issue was that men didn't want to see beyond themselves. At that point, I think a big problem was that men would just see that what they were going through in isolation and wonder why women would complain. Uncertainty. There was a lack of awareness of the experiences from the women's point of view that allowed for continual gender neglect towards women from men. All not all men. I don't really know. I mean, this is just what I think happened. I could be wrong. I could be wrong government things because I've not read a lot. But I have read some parts, some things, and I'm still wary of like what I don't know because I know it's a lot. But still, quite evident that there was a huge gap in understanding the experiences of women because men saw things in isolation of themselves and what they did and what they, provided and all that stuff. And I think the same thing is happening in the similar situations. I think everything the women felt for is to be understood, to the point that we are now understanding the economic implications of being a housewife, the economic work of being a housewife, and how housewives were kind of economically beneficial to, men because we made, got the money of a wife, then. But then in such an instance, to be honest, I don't know. Sorry. I didn't like that argument because I think it's problematic. I think then again, okay, let's also, economically measure the worth of a working man to a stay-at-home wife. It's, I think to depict the purpose that people do these things out of love and out of like some sort of responsibility rather than trying to serve, even if they are trying to serve, the service is a form of love to the person that we or something like that, or a drive to survival, or I don't know. But the question, which, yeah, so yeah, we are coming too much, not too much. We're coming to a place where we're beginning to understand the full actual implications of like the treatment women receive and what that actually does. And I do think it was important. I don't deny the importance of it because I think everyone has experiences. And I'm not someone who stops at the experience of men. I don't think that. I think that's nonsense. I actually, my view on empathy goes beyond men. It is for everyone. And the reason why, because I feel there's a huge knowledge gap. There's a huge conscious gap. I'll say conscious gap because I think the biggest problem with empathy or lack thereof is, or sympathy or lack thereof rather, it relies outstandingly on perception and perception through consciousness. Perception through consciousness, but when we give out this perception, our sympathy or empathy, we lack awareness of the consciousness gap between us and the person we're giving the empathy to. Whether or not you're giving empathy, there is a consciousness gap. It doesn't like you see your boy crying or something and you suddenly feel sad. In truth, you don't really know the full conscious experience. You're just referencing some sort of experience you've had to pass it on to the person. And also the lack of empathy is more or less a lack of reference to project onto somebody, or a reference that doesn't, emit empathy, but maybe anger or something. That's why you might be angry at the sight of, you know, somebody complaining about the hardship of Israel, you know, because to you, it's like, what do they even mean about hardship? Because you don't see it to make sense. Now, whether or not, I think that is actually a good term, consciousness gap. I think I would talk or write about this. But there is a consciousness gap in which I would never understand your consciousness, which dictates your perception, which then dictates how you provide empathy. And you would never understand mine. And I think we need to be careful with that. So I think that's a problem we usually fall into consistently. This lack of understanding and this preference to self to provide an understanding, I think is I would think it should be outdated, but it's not. It's very much the norm. So the consciousness gap is the main thing for me. It's the reason why I am usually easy to withhold judgment, because I do know there is a huge space between me and someone else, and I do allow the other person to be in terms of what they've done, how they've been. And what that means is I do allow that whatever someone does is a reflection of their experience. There is nothing that I do that I do not want to do. Even if I don't want to do afterwards, even if in hindsight I look back at it and I say, well, I shouldn't have done that. I also am aware of the fact that in doing that thing that I was doing, I very much wanted to do that thing. Not very much. And I'm not saying that when I say I very much wanted to do it, I'm not saying that across everything I've ever done there is this over amplified desire to do something. No, I think that's a different thing. I mean, for example, if I really wanted to go on a roller coaster, I really want to do that thing. But if I drink water, I drank water because I wanted to do it. So when I'm saying I really, really want to do it, I'm not comparing that really, really want to wanting to go on a roller coaster because I don't have the sense of enthusiasm with everything I want to do. I just mean from a sense of it is what I was, because in terms of free will, I'm very deterministic. I hold a very deterministic view on free will. I don't think you can not have a deterministic view of free will. Or maybe you can if you have a sense of, if you have a claim for randomness or orderliness in the play of how free will works, but I don't think there is a non-orderliness. I'm not sure. But I do hold a very deterministic view on free will. And so when I say really, really want, I'm saying that we really, really we do things because that is what we feel to do. Everything we do, even having this conversation right now, is because I really feel to do it. If I didn't really feel to do it, I wouldn't do it. And so what I'm trying to say is, and I'm trying my best to try and put it together, and I'm trying to say is that everything we do is a real reflection of how we feel inside to act. And how we feel inside to act is really not, one is in our control, two is, and another thing is not accessible to anyone else. That's why I'm really hesitant to judge, because I understand that when someone does something, and even if there is a consensus in the community to reproach whatever the person has done, I refrain from it because I didn't have that person's will to act in that manner, because the will detects your actions, but you don't detect your will. And we like to judge based on our own perception. our own perception. Our perception has a big consciousness gap in terms of our relationship to other people. And that gap makes me, in particular, provide empathy. You see, now there's a huge jump between consciousness gap and empathy. I cannot justify the gap. I just think it's better. I think it's better we are aware, add more empathy or more respect. At least we should have respect. Maybe you don't want to have empathy, but I think you should have respect for the consciousness gap. The experiences, people act, like I said, people act because they will to do something. If I go and buy something, I'm willed to go and buy that thing. I wasn't willed to listen to music at that point. Instead of buying the thing, I was willed to buy the thing instead of listening to music and instead of any other action. If I was willed to listen to music instead of buying the thing, I would listen to music. And there is no point you could tell me where we choose our wills. We do not choose our will. And the wills then becomes conscious, and the consciousness leads to action. So the consciousness of the will is what leads to action. So I am very, hesitant, like I've said, to push around judgments. I don't think I'm making sense, but I'll just keep going. So the big problem, I believe, from past times, if you look at every big problem, you notice the biggest issue is the a lack of understanding about the consciousness gap, which is, if women were going through things and when trying to articulate what we're going through, they were completely discarded, then you could easily point to that moment where the men could not see where the consciousness gap was. And I think the case is similar. Yeah, I think there's a consciousness gap. I'm not, and that doesn't negate, that someone isn't going through, like, I'm not negating that men of the past were going through a lot. I'm sure they were, but I'm also like, there's also these flip points where, there is a consciousness gap in understanding men's will to neglect the woman's perception. The same way in this current climate, there is a consciousness gap, at least from the men, to understand the woman's desire to neglect or negate the man's emotional feelings. There's a consciousness gap. And I think we should respect both. We should respect all type of consciousness gap. We should respect all type of consciousness gap. The case is, do men deserve empathy? I think I really diverted from what I was proposing earlier. And I don't know if that's a bad thing, because I was trying to talk about certain class of men, which I think I do fall under slightly, because I do try and be expressive. I'm not just type to leave it closed off. I think, men should be more expressive. Not all men. I don't think it should be forced. I think more men are more comfortable not being expressive than women. No, more men. Yeah. No, women, and, less men inclined to be expressive than women. But then again, I do think that, if a man wants to be expressive, I think she will get to express herself. And I think the fans come out to say that the experiences he's had in a certain instance, despite the experience of the other in a certain instance, was not, experience that he found favorable. I think we should look at the consciousness gap and understand that, he didn't negate what his wife went through. He didn't say she didn't have gone through what she went through. He's saying what he went through was terrible as well. And he was immediately silenced and in very, in ways that quite I don't find okay. I think you know men should be allowed to express themselves. Not just men, anyone. Anyone should be allowed to express themselves. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. But I do think it's likely that, we should be open to listening. We should be, at least, I think, even if we might not be cognitively resourceful or cognitively wealthful in being able to accumulate all the possible experiences everyone has, but I also think we can cognitively manage the awareness of the consciousness gap. I think it's simple to be aware of the consciousness gap. It's not, you don't have to necessarily listen and believe or be to empathize with everyone you disagree with, but or you find to be repulsive. Some maybe how they are, what they do. But you should be aware of the consciousness gap between you and their experience. And I think that consciousness gap actually would then lead to empathy in some way. Hopefully. I don't think I answered the question. I really don't. The question was, do men deserve empathy? A certain class of men. Should we give empathy? I don't know. Not should, but I think I would want us to. I want us to give everyone empathy. And men are part of everyone. So, this was long. 40 minutes. Yeah. But I'm exhausted. Okay. Bye.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.